Hi guys, it's Arielle. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you guys are all doing well. In today's video, I wanted to give a little update on the situation, on the apartment hunting, on our current apartment mess. I received so many comments and a lot of the comments had pretty similar questions, so I thought I could regroup everything, categorize everything, and answer those questions and give you guys a little bit more clarity on the situation. And I do just want to say before I get into today's video, just a huge thank you. I am so appreciative for not just the support that you guys show me, but all of the really kind, positive, and helpful comments. There were so many tips and suggestions for ways that we could make our life a little bit easier. There were so many well wishes, and it's hard to express, but I always say that I post these videos so that other people don't feel alone when they're going through a similar situation, or if they've just moved or arrived in Paris and all of a sudden they're confronted with these problems. It's always nice to know that you're not alone. And I think for the first time when I posted those videos and I was reading your comments, I felt like I wasn't alone, and it was a really, really nice feeling. So I'm eternally grateful for you guys. Thank you so much. I'm endlessly appreciative. The first update I sadly want to give you is that we did not get the apartment in the 11th, which is somewhat of a good thing, I guess, because it means you guys have another apartment hunting video to look forward to. But I almost knew this outcome was inevitable. When I was initially touring that apartment, I had the same visiting time slot as another family that was looking at the apartment, like a mom and a dad with children. And I just knew when I saw them that if you're going to compare our dossier, our application of two, a young couple, one with a permanent job, another who just opened a business, who just started their business, and you compare that to like an established family with long careers, it's kind of a no-brainer that we wouldn't be selected. And I do think it is a little bit scary, especially for me. Like I said, I mentioned this in my other video, but in order to submit your application, you do have to show that you earn a stable income. Typically what they're going to ask for is that you have successfully completed your trial period, which in Paris and in France is typically between 3 and 6 months. And you have to show proof that you have completed this period. And then on top of that, you also have to show at least your last 3 pay slips. And so being able to provide this kind of paperwork is hard for someone like myself who just started their own business. So I am a little bit worried going forward, but I'm somewhat confident that we will eventually find a landlord that will be understanding of our situation. And actually, it's not even just finding a landlord. At this point, it's also finding an apartment that makes us feel as good as the one in the 11th did. I think you guys would have noticed, but between apartments 1 through 5, there was quite a big difference, despite the fact that they were all relatively in the same price range. And I think that just goes to show that it does take time to look for and to find the apartment that you want. And it's not worth settling for something that you don't like, because you can probably find something that you love so much more within the same budget. So all that to say, we are continuing the apartment hunt, and I will have another video for you guys on that topic. And I do have so many videos. Like, I'm in the process of working on 5 or 6 videos at the moment that are taking a very long time to film. Some of them are videos that include interviews with local artisans in Paris and, pastry chefs and bakers. And I'm so excited to share that with you. It's just they are taking a little bit of time. So there will be more Paris-centric content coming. I did just want to give you guys this update video because I got so many questions in the comments of my last 2. So let's get into, I guess, the 5 or 6 main questions that I had in the video where I explained the situation with our apartment. Actually, before I answer those questions, let me just give you guys an update on our apartment. Relatively good news. The first piece of news is that because it's much warmer in Paris, like we are nearing springtime, the lack of heat is not so much an issue. That is for sure an issue that will take 6 or 7 months to finish. They have to get the funds, they have to start the construction. They haven't started construction yet, so I have no idea what that's going to sound like, what that's going to look like. But that's not a huge concern anymore because it's not nearly as cold right now in Paris as it was in February when all of this happened. The other piece of news is that they do have a workaround for the heating. They've installed an electrical makeshift heating system for the water. It's definitely not perfect, but it does mean that we have running hot water, which is fantastic. So it doesn't feel like nearly the same level of crisis that it did feel like in February. So now to get to the main questions that I received. The most popular question that I saw, I think, would be, why are you still living here? Why don't you move? And I think my apartment hunting video was a pretty good explanation to that question. It's really just not so simple as packing things up and moving. The rental market in Paris is always saturated, always. I've lived here for almost 5 years. I have lived in 4 or 5 different apartments, and no matter what time of the year you're searching, there is so much competition. And not only does that mean it's hard to actually get an apartment viewing, to like get the attention of these agencies with the apartments on the market, but it means that it's equally as challenging to win the application process. Like when your file is submitted, it's submitted with all of the other candidates, and the only way to get chosen is if you have the best, most secure application in the eyes of the landlord. So this is not a fast process. It's not an easy process. Like you guys would have seen from my apartment hunting video, it was very hard, not only to just get those viewings, but to ultimately get the paperwork and to have a solid application. So that's why we haven't moved. And I think another reason as to why we haven't moved, like moved cities, for example, because it certainly would be easier to look for an apartment outside of Paris or in another city. But both Jean and I are tied to this city for work. So it's just not a viable option to quit our jobs, to close my business, and to move to another part of France, for example. And I guess that leads me to the second most popular question, which was, why not move outside of Paris? Which is a completely fair question, and I absolutely understand the benefit of living outside of Paris. I understand the peacefulness, I understand the more affordable rent, perhaps less competition when it comes to apartment hunting. But my stance on this has always been pretty consistent. I remember when I was working in Toronto, I was living with my parents and I was working downtown Toronto. And the commute to go to and from work on the metro was between 45 minutes to an hour every single day. And I hated it. I remember in that moment, I must have been like 20 years old, I don't know, 20, 23 years old, I don't remember. But I remember saying, I'd rather give someone all of my money to not have to do this commute every single day, twice a day. So for me, it's always been very important to have a short commute and a commute that's enjoyable. I enjoy being walkable distance from the areas of Paris that I go to the most. I enjoy being a quick bike ride into the city center. Like these are things that are important to me, and it will always be worth paying more in rent to have a short commute. I think as well, I know myself, and if it is challenging or if it's time consuming to commute to the city center of Paris, I just won't go as often. And I think that would have a pretty serious impact on my channel and on the content that I can produce. And Jean feels similar. Like I never want to speak for Jean either, but Jean doesn't do a lot of working from home. He's, at the office a lot. And so even for him, I think it'd be very hard to have a longer commute, a more time-consuming commute. And another note to that point is we do have friends, and Jean also has family that lives outside of the city center of Paris. And it is true that the public transportation network is great because it's affordable and it is fast. You have the Arielle train lines that take you to sort of the suburbs outside of the city center. And so if you're just commuting to and from for work, it's not challenging. But a lot of these trains do not continue after like 11:30 p.m., which means that if you're going out for dinner, for example, which Jean and I do often for my videos, if you're seeing friends, if you're going to the theater, if you're going out, it is very hard to always make sure that you're leaving in time to catch that last train. I have been with friends on several occasions where we've been out and about, and then all of a sudden it's like total panic because we look at the time, there's only 10 minutes before the last train, we have to run, And it's not like in Paris where if you miss the last train, you can just take a public bike home and ride for 20 minutes as opposed to sitting in the metro. So that's another reason. I'm sure there's more, but they're not coming to mind at the moment. Yeah, that's why we aren't looking outside of the city center for now. Another question that I got pretty often, and even just comment in general, was why are you paying rent? Stop paying rent. And I absolutely get that sentiment. Trust me, I share that sentiment when I am living a situation where we don't have basic amenities. But when it comes to the law, when it comes to legally what you're allowed to do, you can't just stop paying rent without approval from a judge. And I'm someone who doesn't like conflict. I don't search for conflict. Generally speaking, I think creating conflict by not paying rent would cause me so much more stress and anxieties and problems than just paying the rent itself would. I never want to break the law. Like I'm a rule follower. What can I say, you guys? The law says you got to pay your rent unless a judge says you don't have to. That's just what I'm going to follow. And I did mention this in the first video where I was telling you guys about the situation. This is not my first rodeo. This is the third time where I have had a significant problem with an apartment in Paris. So I've already been down this rabbit hole, specifically my last apartment when I was having the mold issues and the respiratory problems. I was desperate to move. I was desperate to stop paying my rent. But in order to stay, within the law, that wasn't an option for me then. It isn't an option for us now. And it's just not something that we would ever do. Jean and I are both very respectful people, respectful of the law. I just wouldn't all of a sudden stop paying rent. Which also brings me to the fourth most popular question, which was, how is this legal? Which is a great question. I too was wondering how all of this was legal over the past month and a half. And we did seek legal counsel. We saw 3 different lawyers, and they were all pretty much aligned on the advice that they were giving us and the explanations that they were giving us. One thing that stood out to me that I thought was really interesting and maybe not great was that, if you remember, I was telling you that the landlords and the building association first had to meet in a general assembly to discuss the solution because it is a very costly solution. I also mentioned that the price to install a new boiler is estimated between 800,000 and 1 million euros. So it's a very costly decision. You have to have a general assembly to decide how to move forward. And what the lawyer explained to us is that the legal amount of time that the building association has to organize the general assembly and contact all of the landlords and the owners is 14 days. So we had to wait those 2 weeks, those minimum 2 weeks, to have the general assembly, because that's just what the law says. The minimum of time you have to give is 2 weeks to get everyone together. So that's why we had that first initial wait. And it is true that when you are a renter and you're dealing with this kind of issue, you're not technically supposed to have to wait until the building association comes to a decision and allocates funds and all of that. Your landlord is supposed to step in and help you in the interim. And we actually also consulted a plumber and we checked with the plumber if it was even feasible to have our own hot water mini boiler installed in the bathroom. And he confirmed that it was possible. So and even space heaters. I did mention that our neighbor dropped off 2 space heaters for us, which was so kind. But all of that is up to the landlord to sort of put in these solutions while we're waiting for the actual permanent solution to come. And these types of help can come in different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be installing a full-blown boiler in the bathroom. It can be reducing the rent so that we have money to stay a couple nights in a hotel or something like that. And obviously that was not the case for us. Like the the interactions with our landlord were not the most positive at the start. I told you guys they didn't believe me when I, told them about all these problems. But the problem is that the lawyer told us as well, is that if your landlord is not choosing to help you adequately, like to remain within the laws when it comes to being a landlord, then you can involve the courts. But before you involve the courts, you have to write them a letter. This letter, I don't know what the word is in English, but it's an avis de réception, which means that the post person will deliver it, they'll get a signature, and you will be mailed back a copy of this so that you have proof that the letter was actually delivered at what time and on what day. And in that letter, you have to give a landline. You have to give a deadline to your landlord to respond, like a week or 2, for example. And then if your landlord doesn't answer, then you can go to court. So technically speaking, it's not a very complicated process, but nothing is immediate. If you have a significant problem like we did, you can't get help at the snap of a finger. You do have to go through this process of contacting your landlord, sending your landlord a letter, giving them time to answer, and then moving forward with the courts if you need to. And then I think the 5th most popular question, the most common remark that I got in the comments was, why don't you leave Paris? Why don't you go back to Canada? And I think this leads me to a bigger discussion that I want to have, because a lot of people use the comment section of my initial video to hate on France, to hate on Europe, and I really found that unacceptable. That was not my intention. I have so much love for this country, for French culture, for French people. That is the essence of my channel. I love to share everything I learn about Paris and France. I love to share this culture. And at the end of the day, if I didn't feel like living in Paris, living in France is what's best for me, then I would have moved back to Canada and to Toronto by now. And I wanted to use this opportunity to have a deeper conversation on this topic, to talk about why I live here, why I have chosen to make this my home, as opposed to moving back to Canada or Toronto. And I think it's really interesting. Before I delve into this, I want to say that I think every country and every culture has so much value. That's one thing that I've noticed over the past couple years, moving around, visiting new places, living with different people, is that when you only stay in one place, you are sort of completely engulfed in one worldview. You tend to think that what your norm is what's best. I certainly had this opinion when I was living in Canada, and we have such a great healthcare system. We have such great community service programs. I adore everything about Canada. I adored my childhood and growing up in Canada, and I always thought it was so fantastic. But then when I moved to France and I saw how another country worked, another system, another way of doing things, I was able to then see the value in both the Canadian system and the French system, but also the flaws in each of the countries as well. And I think that's I think that eventually leads to progress, is experiencing new places and new cultures and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. I mean, one thing right away moving to France that was so clear to me, because I moved to France to do my master's, is that the cost of post-secondary education is a fraction of what it cost me in Canada. The loans that I had to take out to do my studies, my undergrad in Canada, was crazy if you think about how my master's degree in France cost me 400 euros. So all that to say is, I think every country, every culture, people from around the world, there's so many things you can learn. There's so many fantastic places, and I never want to say that one place is better than another. I never want to say that. I have never said that. But right now, France is the right place for me to live. And that's because I was really trying to think about why I feel so passionately about living here, why my life feels so much better here. And I kind of narrowed it down to maybe 2 or 3 different reasons. The first reason that I noticed after a couple years of living here is that life in general is decentralized from material possessions. I remember when I was growing up, I mean, I was an adult, but when I first started working, I was in university. I had student debt. When I was in school, I was a full-time student, and I had 3 part-time jobs on top of that. I would go to class in the morning, I would go to work in the afternoon, I would go to a second job in the evening, and then on the weekends, I worked a third job. And at a certain point, it was no longer about paying the student loans, because you can imagine 3 jobs as a student is like a pretty significant income, but it was also this liberty that I felt. I could go to the mall and I could buy the nice top that I was eyeing from Aritzia, or the new shoes that I saw at Aldo, or the new dress that I saw at Dynamite. And at this time, those shopping was synonymous with my happiness, and I didn't even realize that. And then when I graduated, I started working this dream job. It was, oh my goodness, I couldn't have dreamed of a better job. It was downtown Toronto. It was doing everything that I loved. And I remember within the first month of working there, I just kept thinking to myself, my career will always come first. It will come before my family. It will come before friends. I just want to climb the corporate ladder, and I want to become a manager. And I'm just so devoted to my company and to my job. And it maybe sounds extreme, but that was literally what I was thinking. And my opinion, my perception didn't change until I moved to France. And I discovered what it meant to have a real professional and personal life balance, to be in a culture where who you are at work doesn't supersede who you are in your personal life, where there's such a high value that is put on family and friendship and your social life, and a work culture where you're not asked to sacrifice your personal life for your career. I can think of so many cases that I have personally lived through or that I've seen where people, don't take their vacation days because it's seen in Canada, maybe North America, that if you don't take your vacation days, you're so dedicated to the company, you deserve the promotion, you deserve a salary increase. Whereas in a country like France, where you have minimum 10 weeks of vacation that you're encouraged to take, it's very different. And my interpretation of this is that because French culture does not revolve around owning all these different material possessions or constantly striving for the newest model, a bigger house, a fancier car, in the same way that I was familiar with in Canada, because you're not so focused on earning so much money to buy all of these new things, you're in turn focused more on the people in your life that matter, on those connections and relationships, physical activity, connecting with nature. Like all of these things are higher on the priority list than buying more, which is really the culture that I saw when I was living in Canada or when I was visiting the US, I want to say. I don't want to speak for the US either because I'm obviously not American. Being so close to the US, we did do a lot of family trips to the US. I have lots of friends who are from the US. But yeah, I never want to speak for the US. That's not my point here either. But I do think there are some aspects of our culture that are pretty similar. And I think pretty similarly, another reason why I enjoy my life in France more is because I like the way that a lot of their systems work. So I've already talked about the education system, how post-secondary education is accessible to everyone. You don't have to take out loans. You don't have to be wealthy to receive university level or master level education. I've talked a little bit about the work, professional, personal life balance, the expectations that your employer has of you. They're never going to expect you to work on the weekends, work after hours, answer your phone when you're not within working hours. But there's other perks that I also really like about work. The amount of vacation days that you have. Another thing that's really great are the tickets restos. I've talked about this a couple times, but a perk that's very common in French companies is to give their employees these restaurant cards that are loaded with a certain amount of money, which allows you to go out for lunch when you're working, where you can use that money at a restaurant or for groceries. And typically this amount tends to be around 200 euros per month, which is quite a lot. That's probably 5 or 6 dates going out to dinner at a restaurant. So I love that. Even public transportation. Your employer will also pay for minimum 50% of your public transportation fees. So the Metro card in Paris is 90 euros, for example, and typically your company will pay 50%, if not more than that. There's just a lot of things that I love about the work culture here in France. I also really like the healthcare system here. I was talking about how my whole life I thought the Canadian healthcare system was the best, but then I came to France and I realized that their healthcare system also includes dental, which the Canadian healthcare system, at least when I was living in Canada, didn't include. And I remember getting my teeth cleaned as a child. I remember seeing the bill, okay, a teeth cleaning for 400 Canadian dollars. And of course, like I was under my parents' insurance, but when I was no longer under my parents' insurance and I didn't have dental insurance, that was a bill that I would have to pay for myself. And in France, that's not the case. And affordability in general is another reason why I really love my life here in France, is that I think that so many pillars of my life are far more affordable than they would be in Canada. For example, my basketball team. I play on a competitive women's basketball team. I have 2 practices a week plus a game on the weekends. And for 1 year of all this basketball, it cost me 130 euros, which is roughly roughly $200 Canadian. I have played in adult beer leagues for softball, for basketball. I can tell you those were not the prices I was looking at, and certainly not for a sport that's going to allow you to play 3 times a week. My gym membership is very affordable. I pay probably 400 euros for the year, and I have all the fitness classes under the sun. I have access to a sauna, to a hammam, to, I don't know, 20 different gyms in Paris. That's affordable. Don't even get me started on the bars and the restaurants. It's incredibly affordable to have a night out in Paris. I mean, I've done many videos on, restaurants under 25 euros that are just fantastic. So yeah, generally, life here is very affordable. The things that are affordable are the things that allow you to go out and spend time with your friends and your family. I didn't even talk about this, but the metro, paying 90 euros for the metro card, which if you have a job is, paid in part by your company. But the metro system here gives you access to the public transportation system here gives you access to not just Paris city center, but all of the trains that take you outside. Jean and I went on a hike to Fontainebleau a little over a week ago, and taking the train to Fontainebleau, which was like 45 minutes, and then taking the bus in the city of Fontainebleau was all included in the Metro Pass that we pay for Île-de-France, which is, what Paris is a part of. So just generally speaking, life is more affordable here, which kind of leads me to 3.3 or 4, is that travel is also much more accessible and affordable when you live in Europe in general, I believe. You guys saw me travel to Greece this year and last year. Those flights were 30 euros. If you want to take a train to London, that's 40 euros. You have so much access to different cultures, different places, all at very reasonable prices. And this is not an exhaustive list of everything that I love about living in France. I could talk for hours and hours on this topic. If you guys want more videos like this, let me know down below in the comments. But I just think that the biggest shift that I felt within myself, having lived in France for so long, is deprioritizing the corporate ladder and reprioritizing my social life, social connections, community, and even my physical and mental health. I really feel that in a place like Paris and in France. And that's also not to say that France is the best either. Like, I'm very clear about this. I think every country, every culture has so much value to bring, to add to this world. But living in different places allows you to compare and contrast and maybe have a bird's eye view of what systems work, what systems don't, what could be improved. So yeah, all that to say, that's why I haven't left Paris. That's why I haven't left France. I love my life here. And I also think that while I am facing pretty serious challenges in my home and in Paris at this time, you will face challenges no matter where you are in the world. They'll just look a little bit different. I don't think that if I was living in Canada, I wouldn't have any problems. It's just, life is a roller coaster. There's always going to be ups and downs. And when you're experiencing a down, I don't think that necessarily has to translate to abandoning everything and moving away. I'm so sorry. This was a much longer video than I wanted to make. But I did think it was important to give you guys an update. Again, I cannot express my gratitude to you for your support, for your kindness, and for making sure that I don't feel alone. I am just so eternally grateful for this community that I have on YouTube, for all of you, and it honestly blows my mind to know that I have you. So that is all for today's video. I will see you guys soon with some more fabulous videos on Paris and as well with another apartment hunting video.